Last time we talked about economic modeling. Now what I'd like to do is develop our first model, that of consumer choice. And the big question for us is often, how do we spend our scarce resources? Those resources that we all have, things like time and money, and how do we decide where to spend those? It's an important question for us, not only as consumers who want to know, am I spending my resources in the best way possible, but also for firms. Firms are really interested in this question as they make strategic decisions. Things like, how do I price my product? What's the quantity that I want to produce? What are the attributes of my product that I should focus on in my marketing? And not only that, it helps firms understand what the impact of a change in those strategic decisions would mean for them. So as firms decide to, say, run a pricing promotion, what impact would that have? And for us then, that's going to be the essential question, is how do consumers use those scarce resources in the best way possible? In order to do that, we need to think about how consumers make that choice. So what I'd like you to do is take a few seconds and make a list and think about how is it that you decide how to spend your money on, say, something simple like what you're going to have for breakfast. Take a few seconds, write down a list, and then come back to the video. Well, hopefully, what you did is you came up with a list, and on that list you have things like, say, the price of the product, or the income that you have, or the amount of the product that's available. To say, what do you like or dislike? What's affordable? How much satisfaction do you get out of consuming those goods? And what you'll notice that most of those can be separated into two groups. The first group is what's affordable, and in that falls price and income and limits the choices available to you. The second category are all things around what your preferences are. What is it that you like or dislike? What's the amount of benefit that you get? So let's start by talking about those limits on our choices, and that's what we call a budget constraint. So let's look at that. In this example, let's say we have two goods. We have Pop-Tarts and granola. And what we want to do now is think about how is it that our choices between these two products are constrained? Well, in order to talk about that, we really need to think about two important concepts. The first is, how much income do I have? What's the amount of money that's available to me? And what do each of these products cost? So let's say I have $10, granola costs $1 per ounce, and Pop-Tarts cost $2 per package. Well, what does that mean for the choices available to us across these two products? Well, if, say, we want to spend all of our money on Pop-Tarts, how many could we buy? And you'll notice there are 5 of those. And in a very simplistic way, how is it that we came up with that number? Well, 5 is just our income divided by the price. And so this is income divided by the price of a Pop-Tart, which is 10 over 2, or 5. This is going to be really important to us later as we talk about what that 5 represents. And it really represents something that's a combination of both our income and the prices. And we could do a very similar process to talk about how much granola could we afford if we spent all of our money there. And so you'll notice there are 2 points here, 5 and 10. Now, as we think about the choices, what if I want a combination of granola and Pop-Tarts, not just all granola or all Pop-Tarts? I can represent those choices by connecting these 2 points as a straight line. This straight line, that is what the budget constraint is. So for us, there's the budget constraint. And you'll notice, what is this budget constraint actually telling us? Well, it's telling us everything on that line or below it, those are all the combinations of granola and Pop-Tarts that we can afford. Everything that's to the right and above that, those are combinations that we can't afford. So this limits the choices available to us. And that's the reason it's called a budget constraint. Now for us, we want to now talk a little bit about this budget constraint and the assumptions that we've made here. And there are some really big assumptions that we've made. The first thing is that we've limited ourselves to 2 goods. So you'll notice the only thing that I have here is granola and Pop-Tarts. So what would this look like if I added a third product? Well, what you'd notice is I would need to add a third axis, and so that would add a third dimension to this. But the big question is, would it change that budget constraint? Well, mathematically, of course it would change it. It would go from being a straight line to being a plane. It would be a little bit more complicated, but it wouldn't change our fundamental understanding here, which is, as we talk about kind of some combination on the line, if we want more Pop-Tarts, what do we have to do? Give up some granola. And so that opportunity cost, that idea that we have there, right, isn't impacted by the limit. All it means is that our graph becomes more difficult. If we add 4 or 5 products, we now are using calculus instead. There's also a second big assumption for this, and that's that prices are constant. So you'll notice the assumption that we have here is that as we say have 10 ounces of granola and no Pop-Tarts, as we give up, say, 2 ounces of granola and gain a Pop-Tart, that's this point sort of over here. Right? We give up 2 and we gain 1 sort of for that. But that trade-off is exactly the same whether we're up here or down here. So what would happen if prices weren't constant? Is it possible that the price of a Pop-Tart changes based on how many we have? Well, for most goods and services, the answer is both yes and no. Try walking into a store and say, buy 1 box of Pop-Tarts and it's $2. Now you buy 5 and go up to the register and they'll tell you it's $10. If you say, oh, well, I'm buying 5, I'd much rather pay $8, they'll laugh at you and kick you out of the store. And so prices for most goods and services that we buy in a store, they're constant. However, if we look at it a different way, say buying a can of Coke versus a 2-liter of Coke, what we'll see is that prices in that case aren't constant. If you buy a small amount of Coke, what ends up happening is you pay more per ounce than you would if you bought a 2-liter. Well, what's different in the model if we thought about that case where the price gets lower as we buy more? What it's really going to do is change this budget constraint so that instead of it being just a straight line, it now extends out a little bit more. And the only difference is, again, it doesn't add to our understanding of kind of how our choices are constrained. All it means is instead of having 1 line, we need to deal with 2 lines. And if we thought about that kind of extending out to even more price levels, maybe this thing even becomes a curve. And again, that's more difficult to deal with, but doesn't add to our understanding of the concept. So let's assume for now that prices are constant, that we're limited to 2 goods. And then the last big assumption that we've made here is that we can buy fractional units. That as we look at this budget constraint, right, imagine that I have this point down here where I have 5 Pop-Tarts and no granola, and I would like an ounce of granola. Well, the budget constraint tells us I can't just buy 5 and 1. That's beyond the budget constraint. And in order to get that, what I need to do is give up half of a Pop-Tart. And so can I buy 1 ounce of granola and half of a package of Pop-Tarts? Well, that's a more difficult question. Then in some cases, that's absolutely true. If you say want to buy a whole apple pie, you could buy half of an apple pie instead. Here, it's a little bit more difficult. If we think about buying a package of Pop-Tarts and ripping it open and showing up to the register with just half of that package, again, they'd probably kick us out. Well, what's the impact of that? What it means is we really can't draw this as a straight line if we can't buy fractional units. We just need the 2 points on that line. But again, does it change our understanding that there's an opportunity cost here? No, not really. Does it change anything about what that opportunity cost is? No. And so as we think about either drawing this as a straight line or a series of points, it doesn't really matter very much. So let's take the easier way, draw it as a straight line, and that gives us a lot more tools available to us. So we're going to leave this as just a straight line. What do we get out of this model then? So for us, the big part that we get from the model is that opportunity cost is important. You'll see here that the opportunity cost of, say, a Pop-Tart is 2 ounces of granola, and that the opportunity cost of an ounce of granola is half of a Pop-Tart. And that's directly related to the slope of that budget constraint. That as we think about opportunity cost, it's what are we giving up when we make a choice? For us then, in this model, the budget constraint represents that opportunity cost. It also shows us the scarcity in the goods and services that we're able to buy. That because our income is limited and these products have prices, that for us we can't get an unlimited amount of either good. And so again, our choices are constrained. The thing that's missing from this model, though, is our preferences. What is it that we actually want to buy? What is it that a consumer wants to buy? For that, we need to include something else, and we call that an indifference curve. That's where we'll pick up next time.